Well, that's where the Renfrew ferry used to leave from, just behind me. It's no more. From here it would trundle across the River Clyde on a short voyage to Yoker, backwards and forwards. I mean, this is what happens when you build a bridge. You know, it invariably means the loss of a ferry. The new bridge built just downstream there has resulted in the loss of the Renfrew ferry. If you think about other locations, the Erskine Bridge used to be a ferry there, no more. The road bridge at Queensferry used to be a ferry there, no more. Skye Bridge used to be a ferry, it's all gone. Life changes, you know. Doesn't always change for the better. I mean, the ferry here at Renfrew ran for centuries. Probably just a rowing boat in its early days, and then with technology it would have got bigger and we'd be able to carry horses and carts, and then cars and lorries and lots of people. I mean, as a wee boy growing up in Glasgow in the 60s, I remember the ferry here. The vehicle ferry was a chain ferry. This two big chains, which I think sort of guided and kind of pulled it from one side of the river to the other. It was always very exciting for a wee boy being inside one of these vessels with portholes and strange sounds and stuff. Yeah. And I suppose at the end of the day you might wonder why the town of Renfrew isn't here by the river. And there is a good reason for that. It's because of water. I mean, the River Clyde floods here, finds its way up the cobbled ramp that the ferry used to arrive at, and makes its way up Ferry Road. I've seen it once where the water started making its way up Ferry Road, and there is in fact a pretty major flood barrier just up there too, that can be put in operation whenever the waters look as if they're getting a bit too out of hand. We can see Renfrew in Roy's military map of Scotland dating to the early 1750s. It's positioned right beside a fold in the map, Story of My Life, and shows a well-developed and sizable town. If we then fade to a modern satellite image, you can see that the Renfrew of old has now been swallowed up in a sea of modernity. Is there anything left of that old town? It's the first 25-inch Ordnance Survey map of 1857 that puts some meat on the bones. Here we see the area by the River Clyde
and even at this early date we can see what we presume were measures to keep the river at bay. The whole area here is hemmed in on 3 sides by water. The Cartwaters on the west, the Clyde to the north, and what looks like a canal on the east. That canal, more of a very long thin dock than a canal, followed the course of the Pudseoch burn from the River Clyde up to the Station Road junction, where it became a little burn again, flowing by the grounds of Elderslie House before becoming something of a mill laid by Millburn Bridge, where the large roundabout at the end of Renfrew High Street is today. In fact, where the canal ended to become a small burn again is marked on maps as the highest point to which the ordinary spring tides flow. The canal was filled in the first half of the 20th century. So, given all the water that was swirling around, practically encompassing the area by the old ferry, it's hardly surprising that the water itself became something of an issue, and the main reason why Renfrew's where it is, and not by the river. If we zoom in on that 1857 map, we can see a long stretch of marshy ground, clearly not suitable for building on. On the town side of that marshy strip, we see a long embankment with an equally long water-filled ditch. It would be tempting to speculate that this is some sort of early defensive feature in Renfrew's ancient past, but it's more likely to be an early form of flood protection. The bank and ditch partially follows the course of Meadowside Street, which is roughly where the modern flood barrier sits today on Ferry Road. If we move a little south on that 1857 map, we get our first decent glimpse of Renfrew itself, and what we're looking at is a typical layout for a medieval town, with a cross, a high street, a wide market street called Hare Street, with smaller roads, lanes and vennels running off this main layout.
The Renfrew of today doesn't feel old. It sort of lacks that ancient charm that you find in other old towns like Crail or Culross or whatever. And as you wander up Ferry Road from the river towards the town itself, that's the site of one of Renfrew's 2 castles, which was just, one of them was here and both are long gone. There's really nothing in the town that feels older than the 19th century.
A nice building used to sit here, the Brown Institute. It wasn't that old. Built in 1903, it was a library and a museum. But, usual story, the building was neglected or abandoned, plants grew in it, there was nearby ground subsidence, and it fell into such a state of disrepair that it apparently had to be pulled down. You can in fact still see the building, mostly hidden under scaffolding, in Google Street View, last surveyed in 2024. But another angle from Station Road, last surveyed by Google in 2012, shows the building in all its glory. We can also see it sneaking into shot on the right-hand side of this early postcard, in a view taken before construction of the adjacent row in the 1920s. But look, that later adjoining row is also in trouble. Often, when a building is removed, the adjacent building struggles as it has nothing to lean against or shore it up. But it's not just that. As you follow the course of that alarming crack running the whole height of the building, you'll see a large tree growing at the top. That tree is destroying this building. Do we never learn about the importance of routine, regular maintenance in preserving our stone-built past? Apparently not. One wonders how long it'll last before having to be demolished. That quaint little barber shop on the street will be no more. Moving further into the town itself, we see the original street layout of the High Street and Wide Market or Hare Street at the junction of what was once Renfrew Cross, the very heart of the town. But there's very little here to suggest that this is an ancient borough. The town hall is, again, just 19th century. It replaced an earlier town hall that would have housed a jail and been used for various civic functions. It is positioned quite prominently at the centre of the town, as was mostly the case in ancient places. You only have to look at old town halls in the likes of Dumfries, Lauder and Newton Stewart to see how centrally located these important buildings were. However, all is not quite as it seems. The High Street looks just as wide as Hare Street, which is where markets were once held. But in fact, the High Street used to be much narrower, being similar in width to just one half of today's street, between the central reservation and the buildings on the north. Where the central reservation and flower beds are today was once a row of buildings, on the immediate south of which was Pinkerton Lane. This was all swept away in 1926. If we return to an 1850s map, we can see Pinkerton Lane and just how narrow the old High Street was compared to Hare Street. We can also see that the Black Bull Inn used to sit right at the end of the High Street by the cross. Today, the Black Bull sits in Canal Street, not far from its original location. And that's the old church just off the High Street. And well, it's not that old like most things in Renfrew. It dates to the 19th century. The place is a much older church. And the grounds around it, the burial ground, it just, rather than feeling like a place that you might want to go into and have a wander around because it might look interesting, it actually feels like a place you're maybe not meant to be. I'm not just too sure why that is. Some graveyards, no matter how overgrown they are and unkept, they do have a certain sort of charm to them. This one doesn't. I don't think the church is a place of worship anymore, and I think there may be a business inside, operating from inside the building, and that's a good thing that the building is still getting used. And as you come along the High Street there, you can see quite a lengthy section of what looks like a cut down old stone wall. And I think that is probably
the boundary wall for the Elderslie estate that used to be over there. It's now completely built on the modern housing, but it's just another little clue of Renfrew's past. You only have to look, though you've got to look quite hard.
The first of Renfrew's castles was in that estate, their location being close to where Crofton Drive meets Crofton Avenue in a big modern housing development. And it was in that castle that Walter Fitz Alan had his base in the 12th century. He was the first Lord High Steward of Scotland, with lands in Renfrewshire, Paisley, Pollock, Cathcart and Ayrshire, and the founding ancestor of the Stewart Kings and Queens of Scotland. Today, Prince William, whose mother Lady Diana's ancestors were probably more royally than the royals, holds the title Baron of Renfrew. As you wander around, there are other clues of Renfrew's past. Some give a small insight into the town's later industries. Here, for example, just outside the church in the High Street, is a disused sign for the India Tire Social Club, a major industry that was not far away in Inchinnan. There's another clue in Inchinnan Road at the end of Hare Street. Here we see that the public baths, which are still open as baths and a great place for an indoor swim, were gifted to the town by Sir Frederick Lobnitz, who owned one of the two shipyards on the Clyde between the ferry terminal and the Black Cat Water. The other shipyard was the London Works owned by William Simmons, and here we see the launch of the Finniston from Simmons Shipyard in 1890. The biggest employer in the town was, of course, Babcock and Wilcox, who, at their height in the 1940s, had a workforce of around 10,000 making steam boilers.
There is one clue, one of very few clues about Renfrew's ancient beginnings, right here at the cross, beside the town hall, the end of Fulbar Street on Canal Street. The building itself looks sort of 19th century, but is it? If you just look very closely, there's a stone that may, and it's a big may, indicate otherwise.
It used to be the Wheatsheaf pub and is now the Luna Rossa restaurant. On the side of the building is a stone bearing the date 1666. Is that from an earlier building? I strongly suspect that it is, although it's sometimes difficult to be certain. In this 19th century photo, we're looking from Canal Street towards the cross and the earlier town hall. We can see a building on the site of the Luna Rossa. It's a thatched building with a steep roof and crow-step gables. Very different to the building that's there now. It looks as if it was the Wheatsheaf pub way back then, judging by the sign above the door. But it's curious how the building on its right is a low building, in the exact same way that the building beside the Luna Rossa today is also low. It would not be out with the bounds of possibility for the old building to have been heavily renovated, with a new roof and major alterations, but with some existing structurally sound bits of wall retained and incorporated into the rebuild. Nevertheless, the photo lets us see how Renfrew once looked. Yep, just as quaint as Culross.
Well, I started this video by talking about water and how it influenced the exact location of the town of Renfrew, up there away from the river. And I'm going to end by talking about water. I'm going to quote from the first statistical account of Scotland. The part of that deals with Renfrew dates to 1792, quite a while ago. So here we go. No place, perhaps in the west of Scotland, is so peculiarly healthy as Renfrew. Epidemical distempers are hardly ever known. Two reasons may be assigned for this. The one is that the town stands upon a bed of sand of great depth, so that all the heavy rains which fall here are soon absorbed, and consequently dangerous damps and unwholesome fogs are hardly ever felt. The other reason is the goodness of the water, which is superior in quality to most places, perhaps in Scotland. So there you have it. Renfrew, probably the healthiest place in the whole country. And at the end of the day, I think we can all do without unwholesome fogs. I'm Eddie Burns. Take care.